All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling Brazil's new energy law. And let me tell you, this is a big one.
Huge. This isn't just some minor tweak, oh no. This is Brazil deciding to completely revamp its energy scene.
You know what that means, right?
What's that?
The reverberations from this thing could be felt globally. We're talking about a potential seismic shift in the energy world.
It's fascinating how Brazil's using its history here. They've been the king of the hill with biofuels, right? Sugarcane ethanol, that's their jam. But now, with this law, it's like they're taking that expertise and saying, look out, world, here we come.
So no, they're not exactly newbies when it comes to this whole green energy
They're
thing.
not even close.
But this law, it's not just about biofuels, is it? It's way bigger than that.
Way bigger. We're talking sustainable aviation fuel. We've got green diesel in the mix.
Carbon capture, it's the whole enchilada. So what's the strategy here? What's the method behind this madness?
Yeah. Interconnected solutions, that's the key. They're not just swapping out one fuel for a slightly greener version. It's about weaving this intricate web that touches everything. Aviation, ground transport, even how they approach natural gas is changing. This is about fundamentally transforming their energy DNA.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my interest. So let's unpack this thing, shall we?
Yeah.
One phrase that jumps out from this law is sustainable low carbon mobility. It's not just about the fuel itself, but how everything moves, right?
100%. And the genius here is that they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. It's like they said, okay, we've got a good handle on biofuels, let's crank those up. But at the same time, we're going to weave in things like biomethane, carbon capture, this multi-pronged attack on carbon emissions.
Let's dig into one of those prongs, sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, for those in the know. Now, I have to admit, turning cooking oil into jet fuel sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi flick. Is this stuff for real, or are we talking about something that's way off in the future?
It's getting very real, very quickly, believe me. Traditional jet fuel, that's a major climate change villain. But SF, this stuff could really shake things up. It has the potential to drastically cut aviation emissions. And we're talking about using stuff like used cooking oil, even agricultural waste to power airplanes. If it works on a large scale, it's a total game changer.
Okay, so Brazil is clearly placing their bets on SF. But how does this law actually make it happen? Are they just suggesting airlines use it, or are we talking about some serious mandates here?
Oh, they're not messing around with mere suggestions. This law lays down the law, so to speak. Starting 2027, any domestic airline needs at least 1% SAF in their fuel mix. And get this, that ramps up to a solid 10% by 2037.
10%. Now that is ambitious. But let's be real, 2037 is a ways away. Why the slow and steady approach? Just giving airlines time to adapt, or is there more to the story?
It's about finding that sweet spot between aiming high and being realistic. The gradual rollout lets them scale up production and sort out any hiccups along the way. Plus, and this is interesting, there's a caveat in the law that reveals a lot about their thinking.
Ooh, a caveat. You know I'm a sucker for a good loophole. Spill the beans. What they slip in there?
Okay, so airlines that already have low emissions, or, and this is important, have limited access to S, they can actually get exemptions from these mandates. It shows that they're not blindly pushing for a single target. They understand that different airlines have different realities.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even juicier. There's this reciprocity clause tacked onto this whole SF thing.
Reciprocity. Now you're speaking my language. Break it down for me. What's the deal?
So say another country, right, tries to slap their own SAF mandates on Brazilian airlines. Well, this law, it gives Brazil the ammunition to say, oh yeah, well, two can play at that game, and impose similar measures on any international flights passing through their airspace.
Hold on. So they're basically saying, you want to play hardball on SF? Bring it on.
Pretty much. And it just highlights how seriously they're taking all of this. This isn't just about cleaning up their own act. They're ready and willing to throw their weight around on the world stage to make SF the norm.
Wow. I'm already sensing this is about way more than just fuel. We're talking geopolitics, economics, the whole shebang. This is shaping up to be a wild ride.
Oh, we're just getting started. Fasten your seatbelts because this is where things get really interesting.
All right, you've definitely got me hooked. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. We've talked about the wild world of SAF, but what about everyday transportation? You know, the stuff that gets us to work, to the store, all that jazz. What's this green diesel I keep hearing about?
Green diesel. Yeah, it's a catchy name. Got to give them that. This is where Brazil takes its biofuel obsession from the lab to the streets, literally.
Okay, so we're talking more than just, like, my friend's biodiesel-powered pickup truck here, right? This is what's the grand scheme.
They basically want to replace a huge chunk, like a really significant portion of the regular diesel, the petroleum-based stuff, with, get this, biomass.
Biomass.
Yeah. We're talking vegetable oils, animal fats, you name it. Things you'd expect to see more in a kitchen than a fuel tank.
Well, Brazil's never been afraid to experiment when it comes to fuel sources, that's for sure. But turning cooking oil into something that can power a semi-truck, that's some serious alchemy. Is the technology even there yet? Or is this more of a long-term goal?
It's surprisingly far along, honestly. And Brazil's not just dipping their toes in the water here, they're going all in. By March 2025, so not that far off, the law says regular diesel needs to have at least 15% green diesel blended in. It's mandated.
Whoa, 2025? That's right around the corner. But hold on, it's not just about hitting that one target, is it? They've got this whole timetable for ramping up that blend even further, all the way to like 2030, right?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder why the gradual approach. Worried about pushback from the oil and gas giants, maybe? Or are there other speed bumps?
It's a balancing act for sure. Got to give the industry time to scale up production, right? Make sure there's enough of like those vegetable oils and what have you to actually meet demand. Can't have prices skyrocketing because of this.
Always the challenge, isn't it? Pushing for change while making sure it's actually, like, doable. But this is where I'm a little fuzzy. So they've got this super detailed schedule, but then they also give the CNPE, the National Energy Policy Council, the power to mess with it, to change the targets. Why all the flexibility? Seems like they might be second-guessing themselves before they even start.
No, I actually think that's really smart of them. Think about it. The global energy market, it's a wild ride these days. This way, they can adjust if they need to. What if there's some huge soybean shortage that throws everything out of whack? Or what if, say, electric vehicles really take off and suddenly diesel demand plummets? They need to be able to roll with the punches.
So less about being indecisive, more about having, like, an insurance policy, some wiggle room in case things get crazy.
Exactly. But it's not a free-for-all either. They set boundaries. Like the biodiesel blend, they can tweak it, but it has to stay within a 13% to 25% range.
So they're giving themselves options, but within limits.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, but we both know that just, like, increasing that blend isn't as simple as flipping a switch, right? They use this phrase, technically viable. What's that actually mean on the ground?
It means making sure this whole green diesel thing doesn't backfire, literally. You need to make sure engines can handle it, right, across the board. Last thing they need is cars breaking down because people are filling up with the wrong blend.
Right, because what's the point of a greener fuel if it wrecks your engine or, like, causes a bunch of other problems down the line? Defeats the purpose.
Exactly. They've got to make sure it's actually better, right? So many things to consider. How do you store the fuel? What does it do to emissions? It's complicated.
This is really making me appreciate just how many layers there are to energy policy. It's not just, here's a new fuel, let's go. It's about thinking 5 steps ahead.
Yeah.
But speaking of different fuels, we've got to talk about something that often gets overlooked in these conversations, good old natural gas. Brazil isn't ignoring that, are they?
Not a chance. Remember our chat about biomethane? That renewable natural gas made from, like, organic waste? Get this, starting in 2026, they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, now we're talking. Give me the details. What's the game plan for making natural gas a little less, well, gassy? Are we talking mandates again?
You bet. It's like they're saying to these companies, listen, you want to do business in Brazil, in our natural gas market, time to start incorporating some biomethane. And not just a token amount. Either we're talking actual emission reduction targets they have to hit.
Now you've got my attention. What kind of targets are we talking about here?
So starting in 2026, it's a 1% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Might not sound like much, but here's the catch. It's capped at 10%, even in the long run.
Hold on, a cap on reducing emissions. Now, that seems counterintuitive. If we're trying to get to net zero, why not just say reduce as much as possible? What's the logic there?
It's subtle but important. It's like they're saying, look, we believe in biomethane, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's still early days for this tech. Got to ramp up production, make sure the infrastructure's there. Plus, you know, got to factor in costs. Push too hard, too fast, and suddenly energy prices go through the roof. Nobody wants that.
There's that balancing act again.
Go for it.
Right, so they're walking a fine line. But hold on, this emission reduction thing, this isn't just for companies producing natural gas in Brazil, is it?
Ah, you're picking up what they're putting down. Nope, this applies to both domestic producers and importers. Pretty bold move, if you ask me. They're basically saying, hey, you want to sell natural gas here, better be as clean as possible no matter where it comes from.
Now that's what I call throwing some weight around. It's like they're saying, We're serious about reducing our carbon footprint, and we're not just going to shuffle emissions around to make it look good. But here's the thing, how do you actually enforce this? Make sure companies actually do what they're supposed to and hit those targets.
They're not just taking anyone's word for it. Companies need to prove they're playing by the rules. A couple ways they can do that. One, they can actually use biomethane, right? That directly cuts emissions. Or, and this is cool, they can buy something called a get ready for it, Certificate of Guarantee of Origin of Biomethane.
Oh, what now? That's a mouthful. Certificate of Guarantee of Origin of Biomethane. Sounds like something out of a spy thriller.
Think of it like a green energy trading card. Companies making biomethane, they get these certificates to prove their fuel's legit, and then companies that need to hit those emission targets, they can buy those certificates to essentially offset their own emissions.
So it's a way of tracking how climate-friendly the biomethane is, even if the actual fuel itself isn't moving around.
Exactly. The beauty is it creates this market incentive to go green.
Talk about hitting two birds with one stone. They're boosting the biomethane industry. A&D giving companies a way to actually meet these targets.
Yeah.
But this whole system, I can't help but think, this has got to be a bureaucratic nightmare. How on earth are they going to keep track of all these certificates and who's reducing what?
Never underestimate the power of a good acronym. This is where the ANP steps in. That's the National Petroleum, Natural Gas and Biofuels Agency.
The ANP, the unsung heroes of Brazil's green revolution, right?
Yeah.
They've definitely got their work cut out for them.
Big time. They're the referees in all of this, making sure no one's cheating, verifying emission reductions, regulating that certificate market. It's a huge job.
And speaking of referees, what happens if someone tries to bend the rules or just flat out ignores them? Are we talking slap on the wrist, or are there actual consequences if companies don't play ball?
Oh, they're not messing around. We're talking hefty fines here, and I'm not talking about a parking ticket. These are designed to hurt. Could be even more than whatever a company saved by trying to cheat the system.
Now, that's what I call putting your money where your mouth is. Definitely sends a message. But let's be real here. This is incredibly complicated, even for someone like me who's been digging into this stuff. Multiple fuels, new technologies, this whole new certificate trading thing. Are we sure this is
On biofuels, pushing those blends higher and higher. We've looked at their plan for greening up natural gas with those emission reduction targets and that whole certificate trading system, and we've barely scratched the surface.
Okay, so we've seen how Brazil plans to green its own energy use. But this law, it's bigger than that somehow. What kind of impact could this have globally? What are we talking about here?
You're right on the money with that the scope of this is enormous. I mean, think about it. Brazil's already a powerhouse when it comes to commodities, right? Coffee, soybeans, all that. Now imagine them with that same kind of influence, but in the renewable energy market. That's a game changer.
So you're saying instead of just shipping out raw materials, they'll be the go-to source for green fuels?
Exactly. And not just any fuels. We're talking about the stuff that's going to be essential for decarbonizing some of the most carbon-intensive industries worldwide.
This goes way beyond just being environmentally friendly. This is about Brazil stepping up as a global leader in renewable energy.
You got it. And here's where things get really interesting from a geopolitical standpoint. Imagine a world where Brazil is the supplier of SAF. Every country needs this fuel to clean up their act when it comes to aviation. That's some serious leverage to have on the world stage.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. They would have so much power in any global conversation about climate action.
And don't forget about the technological advancements they're driving. Let's say Brazil figures out how to make biomethane commercially viable on a huge scale. That knowledge, those breakthroughs, those are incredibly valuable.
It's like they're running a massive experiment and the whole world is watching to see what they discover.
It's a big gamble for sure, but the potential rewards are huge. And even if they hit some bumps along the way, which let's face it, is bound to happen, even those mistakes are valuable. Other countries looking to transition to cleaner energy can learn from their experience.
So it's like they're creating a roadmap for the rest of us to follow, for better or worse.
Exactly. It's a gutsy move, no question. But it's one that could have huge payoffs. And not just for Brazil, for the whole planet.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, so much to unpack here.
It's going to be a wild ride.
You've definitely given us a lot to think about. And something tells me this is a story we'll be revisiting again in the future. This is just the beginning.
Absolutely. This has the potential to completely change how we think about energy. It's a whole new world.
Well, couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. As always, thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious.